May 7, 2003. It's a challenge of faith to be told you'll die if you don't have an operation and you know you won't have one.
What happened with the surgery? It just got dropped. And that only happened once she went in, as far as I could see, once she made the commitment to homeopathy.
Pen was adamant while she was having the homeopathic treatment that you had to believe in it 100% for it to work. And no one around her was allowed to believe otherwise. Right from the beginning of our relationship, we had this issue of trust. Pen said that if we're going to have a relationship, we have to have utter and absolute trust and faith in one another. And she came from some very broken relationships, and she had some very problematic issues with her upbringing. So to go against Penelope's trust was going against the most fundamental principle of our relationship. Penelope very clearly stated on many, many accounts not to tell the family. She was worried that they'd interject in her treatment, come and do something. She was fearful of her family, in a sense, the bossiness of one or two of the sisters, and she didn't want their negativeness. I do remember one incident where we were up visiting the family and Pen was beginning to show some signs. She couldn't sit properly on a cushion. You know, it was very obvious something was wrong.
Peter and I were sitting outside or separate from the group, and I looked across at Peter and he was looking terrible. I mean, we'd had a hard day, and I just said, "Pete, what's wrong?" And he burst out crying, and I was shocked because I'd never seen Pete like that. He was always enthusiastic, positive, in control. And he goes, "I'm so worried about Pen. She is so sick and she won't tell her family."
Penelope was already on quite a strict diet. I think we were told that Penelope had ulcerative colitis.
And I did ask her outright if she had cancer, you know, what was wrong. And she said, "Oh, no." And I got the story that it was, you know, a bowel issue, and I didn't press it.
July 1, 2003. There are thoughts floating, fear rising for the first time that I will die. Francine says don't entertain the thought. Do not choose it.
Pete rang me up to say, "Look, Annie, I just need to tell you that Pen, we've been talking about this condition, but in fact it is cancer. It's rectal cancer." I just remember being really shocked and then saying, "So this is what she's had all along."
I was just totally floored. In fact, my immediate reaction was to be really angry as well as shocked. I just couldn't understand why there'd been this deception going on. Penelope reassured me that she was going on a homeopathic path to treat the disease, and one's immediate reaction is, well, this actually doesn't sound very sensible way to go.
I know when they started the treatment, they were fearful of Tony coming in with negativity, because I think Tony would have smelt the rat. The sense was, right from the very first phone call, you're either with us or you're against us. You weren't allowed in unless you became a believer.
Peter actually became the gatekeeper in that situation, in that it was Peter who seemed to be the one who was more in control of who was welcome and who wasn't welcome, which meant that you went in, did a bit of house cleaning, and you didn't ask any difficult questions.
As I was leaving one day, she said, "Oh, do you think I'm getting better?" And I said, "No, I don't." We were standing in the hallway. I said, "No, I don't think you're getting better." And she said, "Oh, you mustn't say that, you mustn't say that. You won't be allowed to come back."
He was completely convinced in his program, methodology, the exercise, the positive thinking, the diet, and the supplements. That's what was going to really work. Yeah.
I remember very early on asking Pen if she was having any monitoring of the disease, but Pen told me quite firmly that no monitoring could affect her positive frame of mind, so monitoring was not an option. And she had made it very clear that it was entirely in Francine's hands.
July 1, 2003. The pain you have is karmic. It is teaching you.
You felt really helpless because she wasn't taking pain relief, because that would interfere with the homeopathic remedies.
What you are going through will benefit others. It is not for your sake alone. It will be meaningful to others.
She had a sort of bed on the floor because it was very hard for her to get comfortable with the amount of pain that she was experiencing. She would vocalise it, like really big yells, lots of noise, a bit like a woman in labour maybe. She'd lie on her back and cycle her legs and groan and really push out a lot of noise because that's how she sort of handled it. At other times she'd just scream. This time I could see it was too much and she had to ring Francine right there and then. I only heard that end of the conversation. And her words were, but it feels like real pain. And it's too much. I can't do this. I said, Pen, you're in extreme pain. I said, you can't have someone tell you that this is not real, that your pain's not real. And then she started to defend Francine's, what Francine was saying and her method of dealing with it. She said, Francine has just told me that I'm turning the corner and the cure is nearly there. I said, Peter, these levels of pain that Pen's experienced, I couldn't just speak to Pen, I had to speak to Pete as well, because they're in this together, and he was, in a sense, disapproving that I'd brought this up, and, don't go there, Annie, because you don't really understand, was sort of a sense that I had.
And I think this is one of the most confusing factors in there, was Peter's lack of concern at what was happening right in front of his eyes. And by that I mean Penelope's weight loss and Penelope's pain. It was if Penelope's pain was actually not even happening.
Look, there are alarm bells all the time. There are constant alarm bells. When your partner's getting sick, and you can see it, and you can see her suffering, and it got to an extreme stage in the suffering, and she says it's okay. And she says, don't worry about it. It's a part of the cure. It's supposed to go this way. These are some of the symptoms. As if she had a grander plan that all of a sudden it was all going to be fixed somehow.
He loves Pen so much that he didn't want to be seen to be fighting against her. He didn't want to fight against her. He didn't want to have that kind of negativity. That was one of the detrimental aspects later on, this positivity that was not necessarily based on realism.
I've got several friends who are nurses, and I said to them, this is the situation, and they without exception said, that's mad, that's crazy. There seemed to be ignorance of how this disease was going to progress if it remained untreated. I told him that it would be likely that Penelope would develop a bowel obstruction, and would he know how to recognise the signs of that? And I sort of got the usual spiel, which was, look, Pen's, she's doing well, everything's fine, and, we can cope with the situation.
I saw the pain, I saw the suffering, and it didn't matter which way I turned, I was lost in this whole nightmare about what was happening. It's probably whole weeks or months that have blanked out in my mind. You just can't understand it until you're in there, and I can't understand it. 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 And I can
On Saturday, October the 11th, I went down after work to Penelope and Peter's place in Fremantle. It was only 6 weeks since we had learnt that Pen had cancer. Pen was lying to the left-hand side on a mattress, and she didn't say anything to me as I went through. And I said to him, Penelope's lost more weight. And he said, well, she's put weight on this week. And I just shook my head and I said, no, she hasn't, Peter. Anyway, he was very determined that they were going to see the night through on their own, and he was quite emphatic that he did not want me to stay. And I've thought about that evening and thought, well, what if I'd just gone over to Pen and, ignored his instruction and said, how are you, darling? Are you okay? Look, I'm here to help you and I'm here to stay the night. Possibly what would have happened. It might have saved her possibly one absolutely horrific night of the most unimaginable pain. It was probably round about 8:30 in the morning. This was Sunday morning, the 12th of October. Peter rang and said, could we come? He was quite desperate and could we come immediately? We rushed in through the front door and Penelope was simply screaming in agony on the floor. And I've never seen someone in so much pain. And as soon as I went to her, she just started begging me not to leave her. And I knelt down next to her and reassured her that, I was going to stay with her no matter what. I really don't remember much of what Peter was doing at this stage. It was just like he was sort of out of the picture and he had allowed other people to come in and take charge. When we got to the hospital and Pen was admitted to the emergency department, and I remembered thinking, her bowel could actually burst at any time. The only reason that she wasn't still screaming in agony was that she'd been loaded up with morphine. The staff were desperately trying to find out if they could get a surgeon to come and do emergency operation that night, and Penelope borrowed Peter's mobile and made a phone call to Francine. Immediately after that conversation, she said, well, Francine has said that she won't be able to continue treating me if I have this operation. And Penelope then started to question as to whether the operation really was necessary. And we were just absolutely dumbstruck, horrified that that thought could even possibly enter her mind. She was on the doorstep of death.
The most poignant part for me was when the registrar was attending her and changing a drip and giving her some more morphine, and she said to him, what will happen if I don't have the surgery? And he described in graphic detail. I was surprised how graphic it was, but I'm so glad he did. And he said, your bowel is wafer thin, it can go boof at any time, and then there isn't any saving you. The fecal matter goes into your abdominal cavity and basically you rapidly get peritonitis and die a very agonising death. And because the faeces doesn't have anywhere to go, you also vomit your own faeces while you're in agony. And then he said, and that will be the end of Pen.